Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 bringing to you another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. And today I'm going to be talking about the success and failures of one of the greatest and most popular factions in wrestling history, D-Generation X. And this is going to be the first of 5 parts where I'm going to be talking about each incarnation's run from start to finish, and then at the end, after I've done all 5 parts, I will decide whether or not Degeneration X was a success or failure. So we're going to start with the first incarnation, which lasted from August 1997 to March 1998. So Degeneration X started in the summer of 1987 when Shawn Michaels accidentally cost The Undertaker the WWF title at SummerSlam when he struck The Undertaker with a steel chair, allowing Bret Hart to beat him for the WWF title. So the next night on Raw, on the August 4th edition of Raw is War, Shawn Michaels came out to address the fans while being interviewed in the ring about why he cost The Undertaker the WWF title. Now, Shawn Michaels by this point was teasing a heel turn. He was becoming more arrogant, more cocky, and more obnoxious to the fans. And he didn't really apologize for his actions. The most he said was, I called the match right down the middle, and he started blaming the fans and the company for putting him in that position. So the following week, on the August 11th edition of Raw is War, Shawn Michaels teased and hinted that he had acquired an insurance policy for himself, but he didn't reveal who that insurance policy was. We wouldn't really find out who the insurance policy was until the end of Raw is War. So Shawn Michaels and Mankind competed in the main event in a rematch from their classic In Your House Mind Games match, and it was under no holds barred rules. So we would see Triple H, then known as Hunter Hearst Helmsley, who was feuding with Mankind, come out with China and distract Mankind. This allowed ravishing Rick Rude, who had just made his return to the company after a number of years being away. He would come in and hit Mankind with a steel chair, allowing Shawn Michaels to deliver sweet chin music and pick up the victory. Rick Rude had officially revealed himself as the insurance policy for Shawn Michaels, and also Triple H and China were instrumental in HBK picking up the victory. So, what was going on here? Were we seeing a new faction in the making? We wouldn't really find out until the August 18th edition of Raw is War, when a main event tag team match was booked that would feature reluctant partners in The Undertaker and Mankind teaming up together to face Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Now, this was pretty much the beginning of Degeneration X, although they wouldn't get their name until a couple of months later. So it was very interesting, this tag match. You had The Undertaker and Mankind, who were long-time rivals and pretty much waged war against one another throughout all of 1996 and half of 1997. And then you had on the other side Shawn Michaels and Triple H, who both had massive egos. So it was an interesting dynamic to see how these two teams were going to coexist. Triple H and Shawn Michaels, although they were backed in the corner, displayed far more chemistry and teamwork than The Undertaker and Mankind, although surprisingly, they did actually work pretty well together. So China was at ringside. Rick Rude would come out and get involved. He would distract The Undertaker, allowing Shawn Michaels to come in with a steel chair and hit The Undertaker and busting him wide open, causing a disqualification. So Shawn Michaels was officially now a heel, and he would strike The Undertaker again with a steel chair, busting him open even more. And we had our new faction comprised of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, China, and Ravishing Rick Rude. So D-Generation X was born, but as I said, they wouldn't get their name until a couple of months later. So the first incarnation of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, China, and Ravishing Rick Rude would last a total of 3 months from August 1997 to November 1997. And I felt this incarnation of DX made a huge impact. They were vicious, they were cocky, they were funny as well. They were the whole package, and they could be serious when they needed to be. And Shawn Michaels was clearly the man. He was the leader. Shawn Michaels was, the top star in WWF. Triple H, who had already won the King of the Ring just a couple months earlier, he was, for all intents and purposes, the sidekick of Shawn Michaels, but he was getting a big push. China, who was the bodyguard of Triple H, was now the bodyguard for the group, and China was a huge part of the group's early success. She would help Shawn Michaels win matches. She would also help Triple H win matches, and she done an amazing job as the bodyguard for this first incarnation of DX. Ravishing Rick Rude, although a true legend, just seemed like a bit of an odd fit because you had the two goofballs in Hunter and Shawn, and you had China, who was the silent muscle. Ravishing Rick Rude, from what I always remembered, he just stood there in a brown suit and tie, holding a suitcase. But that's not to say that he didn't do his job. He did his job very well. And I felt that he brought some much needed legitimacy to the group. Shawn Michaels was already an established big name, but Ravishing Rick Rude, to me, was, at that time anyway, one of wrestling's biggest names. So I guess in a way, you could kind of look at him as like their manager. I know he was billed as their insurance policy, but I always looked at him as kind of like their manager, from the way he acted. And he didn't really say a whole lot. He did cut some promos, but in all honesty, he did play an important role, but he just kind of felt like an odd fit. He just didn't belong there. But to his credit, as I said, he did a fantastic job. So during this time, the foursome would feud with The Undertaker, and they would all get involved in Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker's match at In Your House Ground Zero, and the whole match just ended in a no contest. And it wasn't until October we would actually officially see D-Generation X come to life. So Shawn Michaels competed in the first ever Hell in a Cell match against The Undertaker. He would win thanks to a huge, shocking assist from Kane, who made his debut. And then the next night, Bret the Hitman Hart and the Hart Foundation would come out and pretty much bash this group and call them a bunch of degenerates. And it wasn't until on the October 13th edition of Roy's War that Shawn Michaels and Triple H would officially coin the group as D-Generation X with themselves, along with China and Ravishing Rick Rude, and their motto was, you make the rules and we will break them. So D-Generation X was officially born, and Shawn Michaels had already won the WWF European title back at One Night Only in September, thanks to a huge assist from Triple H, China, and Rick Rude, where they screwed the British Bulldog. So they was riding a massive wave of nuclear heat after putting the screws to Manchester's own British Bulldog. So, as we head towards Survivor Series, Shawn Michaels would win the WWF title, albeit in controversy, thanks to Vince McMahon, who rang the bell, which is now infamously referred to as the Montreal Screwjob. And then the next night, on the November 10th edition of Roy's War, D-Generation X would officially debut their entrance theme music and Titantron, and Rick Rude would be the first member to come out in the DX music and introduce Shawn Michaels as the new WWF champion. So D-Generation X was officially born. They had got their name. They had got their new entrance music and Titantron video. D-Generation X was off to the races and already established himself as a must-see faction. Now, around this time, after Bret Hart was screwed, Rick Rude would quit the WWF due to the events of the Screwjob, and he would jump to WCW. Now, this is where Rick Rude appeared on WWF Roy's War and WCW Nitro at the same time. And this was due to because Roy's War was pre-taped. So although Rick Rude appeared with DX and beat up Sergeant Slaughter, he was already gone. He would appear on Nitro and join the NWO. So Rick Rude was out of DX, and DX was now a trio comprised of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna. And all due respect to Rick Rude, as I said, he played an important part. He helped get the group over and did his job. I felt DX became what we know. Obviously, the others would come much later, and the rest is history. But I felt the trio incarnation of DX was actually a lot better. I felt that once Rick Rude was gone and it was just left with Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna, I felt the group got a lot better. They were a lot more entertaining and they were a lot of fun. And in some ways, I would even go out and say that the trio incarnation of DX was very iconic. I would even go out and say that it was very iconic. When I think of the original incarnation of DX, obviously I do think of Rick Rude, but I actually think of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna because they made more of an impact after Rick Rude left and definitely got much better because no disrespect to Rick Rude, he was kind of the weak link and you know, he just felt really odd being with those guys and because he's such a super serious guy, it just seemed a bit odd to have him there. We're now moving on to the next incarnation of DX, and this incarnation lasted from November 1997 to March 1998. So that's a total of 4 months. So during that time, Shawn Michaels, as the WWF champion, would feud with Ken Shamrock. Triple H, who won, air quotes, the European title after Shawn Michaels laid down for him on the Christmas edition of Roy's War. He would feud with Sergeant Slaughter, who was the commissioner at the time, and Owen Hart, who had made his return to the company after the events of the Montreal Screwjob. So D-Generation X by this point was a trio, as I mentioned already, and to me, they were pretty much unstoppable. You know, China would really take on a much bigger role after Rick Rude had left, and she really started mixing up with multiple different wrestlers. She would physically get involved in both Hunter and Sean's matches, and she played a very, very big part in the success of this incarnation of D-Generation X. So as we head into 1988, Shawn Michaels would renew his rivalry with The Undertaker, as the two of them would compete against one another for the WWF title in a casket match. And Shawn Michaels would injure his back after The Undertaker backdropped him on top of the casket. And Shawn Michaels, to his credit, still carried on like normal and delivered a 5-star classic, as you'd expect. But it wasn't until 2 days later Shawn Michaels had actually damaged his back. So Shawn Michaels was still the WWF champion, but he would not compete in any more matches until WrestleMania 14. And Stone Cold Steve Austin had won the Royal Rumble and earned himself a title shot against HBK. So heading into WrestleMania, we would have In Your House, No Way Out in Texas when Triple H teamed up with the New Age Outlaws and Savio Vega to take on Stone Cold, Owen Hart, Cactus Jack, and Chainsaw Charlie. So the New Age Outlaws were already starting to mix it up with DX. They would help them out in various beatdowns against the Legion of Doom and interfere in some matches. So we're seeing the seeds for the next incarnation of DX being planted. So Triple H would continue his feud with Owen Hart, and Shawn Michaels, of course, was building up his main event match against Stone Cold Steve Austin. And Mike Tyson had joined DX as he was announced as the special enforcer. But behind the scenes, Shawn Michaels refused to put over Stone Cold. And it was said that Shawn Michaels, for all intents and purposes, was going to be done after WrestleMania 14. He was going to have back surgery, and his career was, for all intents and purposes, going to be over. So Shawn Michaels would lose the WWF title to Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Triple H would retain his European title against Owen Hart. So this incarnation of DX would come to an end at WrestleMania 14. Shawn Michaels would be gone, and this would leave only Triple H and Chyna. But little did anybody know that Shawn Michaels leaving DX would be the best thing that would happen to the group, as the next night after WrestleMania 14, on the March 30th edition of Raw is Raw, Triple H, along with Chyna, essentially reboot D-Generation X in his own image when he became the new leader of the group. But that will be covered in the next edition of the D-Generation X retrospective when I talk about the next incarnation of D-Generation X from March 1998 to March 1999. So the original D-Generation X, in a way, you can kind of look at it as two incarnations. The first incarnation of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Chyna, and Rick Rude lasted a total of 3 months, and the second incarnation of D-Generation X, comprised of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna, lasted a total of 4 months. So when you put it all together, the entire run of the first incarnation of D-Generation X, when you put both periods together, lasted a total of 7 months, which is quite amazing when you think about it. Two incarnations, both kind of different, but at the same time not too similar from one another, made a huge impact. And I would say that after Rick Rude left, D-Generation X got more popular and better, I would say. And as I said at the beginning, that's not to say that Rick Rude didn't do a great job, because he did, but I felt DX got better after he left. And sometimes these things do happen, and sometimes things like that do work out for the best. So, in many ways, Rick Rude leaving was probably one of the best things to happen to DX. And Shawn Michaels leaving after WrestleMania 14, the man who started all of this really, would end up becoming a huge blessing for DX, but we'll save that for part two of the D-Generation X retrospective. So, in terms of the success and failures of D-Generation X first incarnation, I would say overall a complete success, but I would go out and say that the trio incarnation of D-Generation X was much more successful than the four-piece incarnation of DX. Not saying that the first incarnation with Rick Rude wasn't successful, it still was, but I felt when it became the three of them, DX became a lot more successful and a lot more popular. But overall, I would say it was a complete success, the first incarnation of D-Generation X. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on the first incarnation of D-Generation X? Do you look at it as a success or do you look at it as a failure? Which incarnation do you think was more successful? The original four piece with Hunter, Shawn, China, and Rick Rude, or the second incarnation of the trio of Hunter, Shawn, and China? And what was your favorite DX moment from this period? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series with part two of the D-Generation X retrospective, where I'll be talking about the success and failures of the second incarnation of D-Generation X and its run from March 1988 to March 1999. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.